I'm getting ready to start our first hour officially. We're going to go back to the Grey Cup in Winnipeg yesterday, all the festivities leading up to the big game last week. And yes, last night, a big night for the Rough Riders in our territory.
Last play. Alexander needs a touchdown. Heaving it down the field, into the end zone, deflected, and it falls to the field. And Gray has just turned green and white. The Saskatchewan Roughriders and Trevor Harris have won the Grey Cup.
So that is what happened. The Sask Rough Riders taking home the Grey Cup. They beat Montreal last night here in Winnipeg, 25-17. It was the first Grey Cup game since 2018 that didn't include the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But that didn't stop Winnipeggers from coming together to celebrate a, quote, uniquely Canadian, end quote, Grey Cup. CBC's Gavin Axelrod caught up with one of those fans who we're going to hear more from. We heard a bit of him in the news ahead of the big game, actually, yesterday before it started.
Jeremy Remillard.
Tell me about what you guys are doing out here and how long you've been out here for.
You know what? We are celebrating the Canadiana that is the Grey Cup. And as somebody that has never been to a Grey Cup before, having it here in Winnipeg is just like around the city the last few days, etc. It's been amazing to see people from all over the country. And having this as a celebration as Canadian football and a celebration of Canadiana, period, has been outstanding. Just outstanding to see. And I know even though our beloved Blue Bombers aren't in the game today, the expectation when we walk in there is it's just going to be a fantastic party of Canadiana and a celebration of our game, right? So that's my experience so far. And we're doing what we normally do here as Bomber fans and tailgating and having a great time. And yeah, it's going to be great. Looking forward to it.
So you're going to be inside at the game today.
100%, yeah. Yeah.
What's it like, I guess, knowing that you're here to celebrate but the Bombers aren't in the game this year? First time in quite a while.
It's tough. It's hard to kind of accept as a blue and gold die-hard Bomber fan like everybody else here. But at the same time, there's a little bit of solace in the fact that Saskatchewan is here. You know, they're kind of like our little brother that lives next door that we took to the prom and into the stadium, right? And we're just here to watch over him and make sure everything goes the way we want it to, because we want the Grey Cup to stay in the West.
So you're cheering for the Riders today?
For one day, and one day only, yes. Yeah, about 10 o'clock tonight when the game is over, that will all be over. But at the same time, it's not anything against Montreal. They're still Canadian. It's fantastic, but there's a little bit of a brotherhood on the prairies that we have to kind of stick to, right? And for one day, we'll wear our Bomber gear, and we'll still, cheer for our little brothers next door.
Is that going to be hard for you to cheer for the Riders?
It's going to be incredibly difficult. It's going to hurt emotionally on the inside. But at the same time, like I said, keep it in Western Canada, which is a terrible thing to say because I love this country more than anything in the world. So having it as a celebration of Canadiana is fantastic to have somebody from the East and the West. Just so happens we live in the West. So, and when we go back to the East and the game's either in Hamilton or Montreal or Toronto, then they can cheer for the East. I get that. That totally makes sense. But that's the beauty of the CFL, right? So.
Were you ever worried before the week because the Bombers weren't in that you wouldn't be able to have fun? Like, are you surprised about how much fun you've had this week?
Emotionally, for me, it's super stressful, right? Because when we lost to Montreal and we knew we weren't going to be in the game, that was tough. Like, it was really tough to kind of process that. It's like, we haven't had the Grey Cup here for 10 years. And then to have us get that close and not be able to get here to play in our own stadium, I mean, that would be the ultimate, right? To watch the Bombers play a Grey Cup in Winnipeg and to win the game would be unbelievable, right? So you dream about those happening. So it was very gut-wrenching and heart-wrenching when we realized it wasn't going to happen. So it took a few days to get over that. Once we got over that whole situation, that it's still going to be a great day. The Grey Cup is of our game, and I think as Bomber fans we need to represent to the rest of the country We brag about being the CFL's loudest fans. We brag about having 14 straight sellouts in a stadium that fits 30,000 plus people. And today's our day to kind of represent that whole thing, right? So
I know some Bombers fans were like they couldn't get rid of their tickets fast enough for today's game. Did you ever think about dumping your tickets, or were you always going to go?
No, I mean, it might have crossed my mind for a millisecond, but the more I thought about it, no, it was absolutely, we got to go to the game. We have to represent our city, represent our stadium, represent the loudest fans in the CFL, and show everybody how it's done.
So that was before the game, but some insight into Bomber fans that might have been there yesterday at the Grey Cup here in the city. Jeremy Remillard, local fan, in conversation with CBC's Gavin Axelrod before the Grey Cup game yesterday. So can we just talk about a couple of things here? First of all, I thought the city looked great. The shots of the city, the drone over the stadium, that chill in the air, good football weather. Just loved that. And just as a Winnipegger, felt really good to see a good show put on overall by the city. I mean, for festivities in the 3 days. So we'll see what the economic boom is. We always get the numbers, but we'll have to quantify whether or not that is actual impact, and we'll have to do some analysis of that. The halftime show, this is not a statement. I know it was a big kerfuffle about MGK. I'm not minimizing that. People were concerned because not a Canadian artist playing halftime. But just as a show, watching that for me, I thought it was fantastic. So I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that. And I also just want to mention Katie St. Germain, right? Singing the anthem, doing Manitoba proud of Niverville, Manitoba, in that fantastic coat out there. If you haven't seen the video, you want to go back and check that. So lots going on, including the first point of the game, which was a rouge. I can't tell you how many games I watched where I've never seen a rouge. Now, this year we're talking about it because of the CFL rules, and there it was in the first play of the game. Actually, it could have won the Grey Cup, but it didn't turn out that way. It was not a one-point spread. Saskatchewan beating Montreal in Winnipeg in the Grey Cup final last night, 25-17. Well, next on the show, does your news sound like this?
Ladies and gentlemen, the pleb is back. In this report, we got to talk about the bombshell news here happening in Canada, as a Conservative member of Parliament has done what is the worst thing you could possibly do and crossed the floor over to the Liberals. That's a clip from @thepleb reporter on YouTube. He has hundreds of videos focused mostly on Canadian politics with a whopping 253,000 subscribers. Now, a new report is showing that younger Canadians are getting a lot of their political news from social media influencers. The authors say that on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, and Blue Sky, influencers now reach more people than traditional news outlets. The researchers at McGill University and U of T found that almost 2/3 of the political content that Canadians see online in fact comes from those influencers. To have a closer look at the media landscape around political news, this morning we have Anja Karadeglija with us. She's a reporter with the Canadian Press Parliamentary Bureau. Good morning.
Good morning.
What does this tell us more, about what this Canadians are getting political news? I've done the top line, but what's your sense of this?
So it is important to note that the research was focused on these 5 platforms that you mentioned. So it didn't look at where else Canadians might be getting their news. It didn't look at traditional platforms or any other websites. But certainly when it comes to these 5 major social media platforms, it tells us that when a Canadian goes on these platforms, they have a bigger chance of seeing content from political influencers than from news outlets or from politicians themselves.
What's a news influencer, just for the sake of this discussion?
So the researchers looked at what they termed political influencers. And the way they defined that was people who had more than 10,000 followers and who posted primarily about politics and primarily about Canadian politics. But then they had to figure out how to parse the difference between somebody who might fall more on the journalistic, columnist side versus an influencer. And the way that they did that was they looked at the kinds of content that person posts. So if somebody says, hey, here's the latest article that we've done on what the government is doing, then that would be journalistic and wouldn't classify as an influencer. But if that individual consistently went beyond that, with their opinion on what the government is doing or on that government policy, then that might move them into the influencer column.
Okay, so you said something important there because you used the word opinion, which in my 20 plus years as a journalist, almost 30 now, I mean, that's a key difference. Now, there are columnists, traditional media as well. Like, we know those distinctions around what that means. But what are the risks of getting political news from someone who is an influencer with an opinion, I guess?
So it's the same, the same risks as getting your information online in general. So the risks are that, obviously, if you are only going to people with an opinion, and if you're only going to people with one particular kind of opinion, then you're only getting one side of things. So you may be missing a full picture of things. You may be getting an inaccurate picture of what is happening.
And I guess the biggest thing with this is that if you're lacking that's fine. That the opinions are out there all the time. We should be leaning into all kinds of different perspectives. But is the concern around a lack of critical thinking from people who are going to influencers to get their political news?
I mean, the researchers didn't get into that. They really are just trying to map out the problem, and that is really, there's so many unanswered questions here that. Because this is such a new phenomenon that we're just starting to get a handle of understanding the extent to which it's happening, that there are a lot of unanswered questions.
So let's look back then at traditional outlets, because if young people aren't coming to traditional outlets, what could we and they do better, those outlets, to better connect with younger audiences that might say, well, there's reasons we're not listening to what you have to say?
I mean, I think that is a question that every single news outlet is probably asking themselves. And the answer to that question is just, they're all going to have to determine what is right for them. There's likely a way to look at what influencers are doing and why they're connecting with Canadians, and figure out if there's a way to incorporate elements of that doesn't mean sacrificing objectivity, that doesn't mean sacrificing journalistic standards and practices.
With so many of these political influencers out there right now on social media, how do you decide which ones to trust and follow, or which ones you're going to include? Is there a way for people to navigate?
It's probably the same advice that really given and accepted when it comes to getting information online. It's never good to get all of your information from one source or one type of source. It's important to have varied sources of information. And when you're deciding whether something is a reputable source of information, one thing you can do is look at the sources of where is that person getting their information from.
Anything to add, Anja, that I haven't asked you that you think is valuable this morning?
Just that this is it's just so fascinating because it is such an emerging brand new thing. It's something the researchers kind of flagged for the first time when it came to the federal election. It was the first federal election in which they noticed this phenomenon. So just that it's a lot of questions and a lot to watch out for here.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That is Anja Karadeglija. She's a reporter with the Canadian Press Parliamentary Bureau. We reached her this morning in Ottawa. All right, next, the Canadian Cancer Society's released its latest report tracking cancer statistics across provinces and territories, age groups, as well according to sex. So they broke this down in a number of ways. The data allows us to look at the bigger picture of cancer in our country, including where we're succeeding in prevention and screening, and where we need to do more work. Let's talk about it with Brandon Purcell, Advocacy Manager of Prevention and Early Detection at the Canadian Cancer Society. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
So let's break out this, in pieces. First of all, what does the report say about the most common types of cancer right now being diagnosed in our country?
For sure. So this foundational report, which is made possible through the Canadian Cancer Society's partnership with Statistics Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada, really highlights the tremendous impact that cancer is having across the country. This year, we expect to see 254,000 people diagnosed with cancer. And overall, we're going to see lung, breast, prostate, and colorectal cancers make up just over half of those. And in addition to that, we're actually expecting to see more than 87,000 people die from cancer, unfortunately.
In what demographics are we seeing the most change?
So overall, we're seeing a decent amount of consistency, with 9 in 10 cancers expected to be diagnosed in folks over the age of 50. But what we have been seeing over the years, and we've been tracking this, is a steady but consistent increase in cancer rates among younger people. So in particular, women under 50. There's a couple of cancers we're seeing there. Number one is breast cancer, which is why it was so important for governments to lower the age of breast cancer screening. As well, we're seeing a worrying change in the rates of cervical cancer, which for so many years have been declining, have now actually plateaued.
So I realize this study was about stats, but do we have an understanding about why we're seeing more younger women with breast cancer and cervical cancer being a concern as well?
So with respect to breast cancer, the truth is we don't know the answer. There's a lot of factors that can be at play, but that's why having access to that early detection method via mammography at a younger age is so important. With respect to cervical cancer, we know that more people than ever are contracting the human papillomavirus, which is an STI that leads to cervical cancer and a number of other cancers in men and women. And we know that rates of HPV vaccination, which is the vaccine that can prevent the human papillomavirus, have been decreasing in parts of the country.
So Canada has this goal of eliminating cervical cancer by 2040. Given what you said, are we off track then?
That's right. 5 years ago this week, Canada made that commitment to eliminate cervical cancer. And unfortunately, because of this change we've been seeing, we're no longer on track to eliminate cervical cancer. And there's a number of things that we can do to change that. The first thing we talk about is really making sure that people get their HPV vaccinations. So Manitoba has been a leader in this by allowing folks to have easy and open and free access to that vaccination consistently, which is fantastic. We're also looking for all provinces and territories to change the screening method for cervical cancer, so switching from Pap testing to HPV testing, which is more accurate and can actually be done less frequently, so 5 years as opposed to every 3 years. And we're also looking for governments to allow women who get cervical cancer screening to do so at home. We're actually now at the point where we have individual test kits that can be mailed to your house. You can do the test at home through a simple vaginal swab and send the test back in the mail to a lab. It's a simple method, and so we're looking for Canadians to help us advocate on this by going to cancer.ca/stopcervicalcancer, where folks can write a letter to their MLA asking them to move on these important pieces.
What else would you like to mention out of the report, Brandon, before I let you go? Obviously, whenever we do an interview about a report, there's a million areas you could look at. But what stood out for you that we haven't talked about yet, either in the area of prevention or care?
That's a great question. I appreciate you saying that. So, for me, what the report really highlights is the importance of both prevention and screening. Part of the reason why we're seeing these increased numbers is partially because of increased population, but because people are taking up screening when it's available. So that's why it's so important for women to have their mammograms and go for cervical cancer screening. It's important for men to get their PSA testing when they qualify, because when a cancer is caught early, it is so much easier to treat, and the likelihood of survival is so much greater. In addition to that, we know that 2 in 5 cancers can actually be prevented, which is why things like the HPV vaccination are so important, because it can prevent not just cervical cancer women, but a number of other cancers in men and women. It's why we need to have a conversation about our alcohol consumption, unfortunately, because alcohol after tobacco is the number one risk factor for cancer, unfortunately.
Thanks for your time this morning and walking us through some of this data that is new. We appreciate it.
All right. Take care, Marcy.
That is Brandon Purcell with us live on CBC's Information Radio on CBC. Advocacy Manager of Prevention and Early Detection at the Canadian Cancer Society. Next on the show, let's return to that story that you might have caught at the top of World Report about Rogers. For a lot of Canadians, getting help from telecom providers can feel like a full-time job. And 2 Rogers customers, one here in Winnipeg, another on Pender Island, BC, say what should have been a routine service call turned into weeks of frustration. Their stories reveal a lot about the state of customer service in Canada's telecom industry overall. Erica Johnson joined us to talk about her Go Public investigation in some detail. She spoke with Corey, actually, on Friday.
Good morning.
Good morning, Corey.
So let me guess. So these people spent hours on hold.
How did you know? Yes. This all started when we heard from a Winnipegger, Anil Sedha. He contacted us after what he describes as an incredibly frustrating experience trying to cancel his internet service with Rogers. He decided to cancel it because he got a better deal with another provider. He thought it would be easy, that he'd go online, click a couple of buttons, and voila, his service would be canceled. But instead, he says, it took about 7 hours over several days, time spent on hold, getting disconnected, getting passed from agent to agent again and again.
It was a non-stop theme of we are having a heavy call volume.
He says no matter when he called or what day, he couldn't reach anyone who could cancel his service. And then when he finally did reach someone, they told him that they couldn't cancel, on the phone. He actually had to send them an email.
The very first reaction in my mind was like, are you kidding me? Like, first, you don't let me cancel online. Then there's no support mechanism over the phone. Finally, I get a hold of someone, and then they're asking me to go back to email.
Wow. Okay.
So extremely frustrating for him, right? And he says it left him wondering how anyone could navigate the system. What if you're a senior? What if you're a newcomer to Canada? And he felt exasperated that something that was so easy to sign up for would be so difficult to cancel.
And he's obviously not alone in this experience. There's other people kind of stuck in the queue as well, eh?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have heard from dozens of people who are unhappy. You go to social media, there are all kinds of posts from customers complaining about long wait times, hours and hours, complicated cancellation procedures, poor service. Many say that the problem is Canada's dominance, the monopoly that exists in the telecom industry in Canada. Bell, TELUS, and Rogers, they account for about 90% of the revenue in the telecommunications market. We spoke to Eugene Chan. He's a marketing prof at the Ted Rogers School of Management. And he says Rogers' takeover of Shaw in 2023 only compounded that lack of competition.
It reduces the need for these telcos to compete and to provide good customer service because they think that customers need us, and so we don't really need to do anything to improve our service.
And Chan says without real competition and few federal rules around customer service, big telcos have little incentive to do any better. Rogers declined an on-camera interview request, but they sent us a statement and they said they have millions of customer interactions every month and that they work hard to deliver a great experience.
And meantime, though, Rogers it just cut ties with a big call center too, didn't it?
Well, yeah, they did. It recently ended its contract with a third-party call center called Foundever. It employed hundreds of customer service agents, people who answer those phones when you call in. Neither Rogers nor Foundever would say whether those jobs have been moved and how many positions were actually lost in that layoff. We did speak to 2 former employees at that call center, though, and they say they worry things are going to get worse, that they spent much of the last year training up an AI system. So it would listen in and then it would start making prompts about what the agent should be offering or saying or doing for the customer. One agent said that he worries that Rogers policies require agents to upsell or sell products to people on every call, and that the lack of a personal touch with an AI system, would be lost or might be lost. And he worries, for instance, if somebody's calling in because a family member has died and they need to cancel the service, he worries how sensitive an AI prompt is going to be.
I understand you actually spoke to someone on the West Coast looking for just, that human connection.
Yeah, we did. We spoke to Fran Moreau, who lives on one of the Gulf Islands off the BC coast, Pender Island. A few months ago, a technician came to her house to replace her modem. And then soon after, she and her husband started getting 2 bills, one for her old account, and then there was a new account that was created, and the old account was never shut down. And like Anil Sedha, she says she spent hours on hold, was repeatedly transferred between departments, and still couldn't find anyone who could help her.
I wasted a lot of time and some sleepless nights wondering, what am I doing wrong here? Why can I not get in touch with anybody? It's just extremely frustrating.
She only got help after she reached out to the CCTS, the Commission for Complaints for Telecom Television Services. It's an independent ombudsman that resolves disputed disputes between customers and their telco providers. It doesn't handle general customer service complaints, though, but it was able to help in this case because it was a billing error. Rogers apologized. It offered Moreau to lower her monthly bill by $40 and gave her a $250 goodwill credit.
So then if it takes an ombudsman to fix a billing mistake, what does that say about customer service in general across Canada?
Well, experts we spoke to say it shows a system that's broken and underregulated. Other countries are taking action. Now, they point to Spain, which is drafting a law that will require the vast majority of companies, big companies, to answer the phone within 3 minutes. The European Union is making it easier to cancel contracts. Germany already requires 2-click cancellations, meaning it shouldn't take more than 2 clicks to end a service. But here in Canada, there are no such laws. We spoke to Keldon Bester with the Canadian Anti-Monopoly Project, and he says Canadians are the victim of a telco oligopoly.
They sort of move in a pack, whether it's on the price of plans, the availability of international roaming, whatever product attributes those are. And so when you really don't have a lot of competitive differentiation, you're bringing the sort of incentive to switch down.
And he says it's time for new rules to make canceling or resolving issues simple, not a marathon of hold music.
So then what do we do while we wait for that to happen besides listen to hold music?
Well, people like Anil Settha are left on their own. After numerous phone calls, though, he estimates it took about 7 hours over several days. He was finally able to say goodbye to Rogers and says, unfortunately, he couldn't say goodbye to his lasting frustration.
Reporter Erica Johnson in conversation on Friday with the CBC's Corey Funk. If you have a story you want Erica and her Go Public team to investigate, remember they're just an email away. gopublic@cbc.ca. Well, it's Monday morning, back to work for a lot of people if you had the weekend off. We're starting a series this week about something that happens at work. The workplace is where most of us spend most of our time, actually. But how do you encounter conflict where you work? How do you meet that? How often do you encounter it? A report from Myers-Briggs Company in 2022 found that employees spend more than 4 hours a week dealing with conflict. We wanted to hear from Winnipeggers about some of their experiences at work. So to start our series this morning, CBC's Jim Agapito talked to some people about that and also got their suggestions about the best ways to handle workplace disputes.
Mary Lou Dreger.
Workplace conflict. I understand that you are retired, you said?
I am.
Have you experienced workplace conflict, and what was it?
Of course. I was a teacher. There's a lot of politics in education. There were lots of conflicts. Conflicts with the government about the way I should be teaching, conflicts with fellow staff members with whom I didn't necessarily always agree. But I loved my job, and by and large, people were wonderful. But yes, there were always conflicts. And between parents who weren't happy with the job I was doing either. So that happened. Yeah.
How do you resolve then a conflict like that?
Some conflicts with parents, if I just went out of my way to connect with them and talk with them and go the second mile with their children, that seemed to resolve it. With colleagues, I guess you had to have face-to-face discussions, and some of them were hard, and sometimes they got resolved and sometimes they didn't.
Generationally speaking, do you think that that's, different in how you have to approach conflict?
I think probably in my generation, we had more of an idea that we had to listen to our superiors and maybe not confront them as much because we wanted to keep our jobs. I think I'm not unhappy that that's changed. I think maybe just from thinking about young people today, they're maybe a little bit more outspoken. They maybe assert their rights a little more, especially women. So I'm not saying that it's bad, but perhaps there is more conflict now because people are sticking up for themselves a little more.
My name is Ben McCorkle. I am definitely a Gen Xer. I'm an IT professional.
Have you ever been in a workplace conflict, and can you tell me about that?
Oh, absolutely. Conflicts can come anywhere from clashing of personalities to conflict of work to getting things done. And the big thing of resolving any type of workplace conflict is to fully understand what that conflict is, why it occurs, and what you can do to stop it and prevent it from happening in the future.
And when you do find yourself in a conflict, what do you do?
I hope you don't find it coming around again, and hopefully the reason that conflict was actually there was a result of you just simply not understanding something and not doing something blatantly wrong.
My name's Isaiah Hunt. I am Generation Z.
Have you ever experienced a workplace conflict?
Not with like coworkers, but with like some managerial like positions and stuff. There's some managers out there who are just like, just like get that power to their head, Sometimes it gets resolved, sometimes it doesn't, but when it comes to employees, not necessarily a lot of like workplace conflicts where like it's impeding my work or anything like that. It's just like makes a bad environment for a bunch of workers, Yeah, whenever someone tries to bother me at work, I'm just like, hey man, I'm trying to do my job, I'm here to get my bills paid. I don't need any more headaches here. I already got a headache coming to work.
And what do you do for work, if you mind me asking?
I do security at Mainstay Suites.
Do you think the way that different generations deal with conflict?
Different generation, they probably go for like, go to HR over like some bacon sandwich, bologna sandwich or something like that. But if I'm at work and I see my sandwich gone and work coworker has some crumbs on his fingers or something like that, I'm just gonna be like, hey bro, like come on, my name's already on there, man, But if we resolve it quickly, surely he'd be like, just give me a sandwich from McDonald's, something that would be all right. But like if I was like older generation, they go straight to the manager and make it a whole big deal and all that, It's just like I don't know, I just feel like people like make headaches where they're not supposed to be, So I usually quickly resolve my spiels with my coworkers pretty fairly, Yeah.
My name is Ralph Erb. I'm millennial. I have experienced workplace conflict. It was back in 2010 at Burger King. There was one of our fellow employees that got kicked off at the management, stormed out, slammed the door, and it scared me quite a bit. Afterwards, I talked to the management and told them that it scared me a little bit, and they dealt with it accordingly. So,
how would you say you deal with conflict personally?
Not in the best of ways, to be honest, but I'm trying to get better at it every day. So,
my name is Renindi Gunasekar. I'm Gen Z.
Have you ever experienced workplace conflict, and what was it?
I'd say not anything that I was actively involved in, but with the people around me, yes. It's very petty things, though, I'd say. I work in fast food, so it's just a lot of people just not getting along with each other that well, and just having issues with other people's work ethics, stuff like that.
How do you then resolve conflict?
Oh, okay, good question. Well, for me, I'm huge on communication, so I would always try and talk it out as much as possible, and that's like my go-to, is just try to talk it out, and if it doesn't work out, then I don't know, maybe take it to the higher ups kind of thing, but yeah.
CBC's Jim Agapito kicking off our series with your voices, some Winnipeggers about conflicts they've experienced in the workplace. Well, next on the show, as we've been reporting, the Manitoba government has been on a mission to try and recruit more doctors from out of province and all across North America. On our show, we recently had an American doctor who came to work here. The political climate in the U.S. has been one of the reasons for some doctors making the move to Manitoba. But now Manitoba is also trying to woo Quebec physicians. The province is banking on its bilingualism to attract Francophone health experts. And it all comes amid growing tension between doctors and the Quebec government over the passing of Bill 2. CBC Radio-Canada's reporter Catherine Moreau has been working on the story, and she's in studio with her report about it. Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Marcine.
So can we start with what's happening in Quebec? What is Bill 2? Why are doctors there unhappy?
Yeah, Bill 2 is a legislation that takes effect in the new year and will impact how doctors are paid because it will link compensation to performance targets relating to the number of patients doctors have. The legislation would also impose fines up to $20,000 per day on doctors who take, quote, concerted action to challenge the government's policies. Since the bill passed last month, there has been an exodus of doctors there, many of them going to Ontario, being tempted as well by New Brunswick, who put out an ad targeted towards the bilingual doctors, where they say they feel more supported. And that support is something that did come up when I spoke to a doctor here in Manitoba who trained as a physician in Quebec, but chose to come work here in Winnipeg. She's been here for 3 years now. Her name is Dr. Annie Drapeau. She's the neurosurgery residency program director and pediatric neurosurgery service lead at Winnipeg's Health Sciences Centre. So I asked her how Manitoba compared to Quebec and to the U.S., where she also worked for 6 years prior to moving to Manitoba. Here's what Annie Drapeau had to say.
Here, I really feel supported and heard, and either at the hospital level or the government or my colleagues or my leadership, really about, what are some of the challenges that we have. And there's no quick fixes, but it does seem like people are trying to work towards a more broader solution. So I think that's a really great place to be, where you feel respected and heard, and there's momentum, and you see things changing in the right direction.
And what has our province said about the new recruitment campaign?
Well, in a written statement, Health Minister Uzoma Azaguara speaks about what Manitoba has to offer. I'm going to quote them. We're showcasing Manitoba as a welcoming and affordable place where physicians can build rewarding careers with an excellent quality of life. We offer a career in strong public healthcare system, one that serves a diverse population, including French-speaking communities, and direct one-on-one support for physicians looking to become unlicensed in our province. End of quote. The minister says it's a targeted digital recruitment campaign emphasizing Manitoba's reduced regulatory burden, increased autonomy, opportunities to build their practice in a large Francophone community.
Targeted is right. I mean, that last part of that quote, direct one-on-one support for physicians looking to become licensed in our province, and highlighting the bilingualism. Mm-hmm. How much interest has there been from Quebec doctors wanting to come work in Manitoba then?
So I actually reached out to Doctors Manitoba to see if they'd heard from Quebec doctors. Here's what they shared in a written statement on Friday. We had a lot of interest from Quebec physicians about opportunities in Manitoba. So just last week, this was now 10 days ago, at the Family Medicine Forum, which is a major national conference that was held this year in Winnipeg. I'm quoting still. Our booth was busy with physicians from other provinces interested in Manitoba, particularly colleagues from Quebec. We are connecting those with physicians from the Manitoba Government Recruitment Office and are happy to support their transition in practice here and when they relocate to Manitoba. So going back to the end of quote. Mm-hmm. Going back to the province's efforts to recruit Quebec doctors, in addition to the digital campaign, a virtual webinar for French-speaking physicians is being offered no later than today. As of last week, more than 100 physicians had signed up for it. So the webinar, Marcy, will provide physicians with a clear understanding of what makes Manitoba a uniquely attractive place to live. This is according to the province, work and build a career in medicine. And attendees will also hear directly from Francophone physicians who have made the choice to move to Manitoba.
What has Dr. Drapeau been hearing from her Quebec counterparts about the working conditions and political climate there then?
So she definitely highlighted, again, the lack of support her colleagues are getting in Quebec. She does say some of the issues are similar between our two provinces, the lack of staff, for instance, and administrative support. However, she's hearing from her Quebec colleagues stories about having to perform non-medical tasks because of shortages, like changing beds between patients. So, and she's heard from all of them that there is definitely people moving or intending to move to she said Ontario and New Brunswick. So according to her, they feel exhausted, blamed for the current situation, and they feel pressure to find solutions, and they don't feel respected. A lot of her colleagues feel very hurt by the situation in Quebec, and I'm quoting her here. They talk about a moral injury. So she says her old classmates have told her about thinking to moving to those two other provinces, but not to Manitoba, something she is trying to change herself.
I've definitely been the one to mention Manitoba and to tell them to think about it because it's a great place to live and to work. Many of them have mentioned that there's been an increase in requests for licenses to practice in Ontario and New Brunswick. And as soon as I mentioned Manitoba and, being a bilingual province for the most part, they all kind of, act surprised and go, oh yeah, I didn't think of Manitoba. So I definitely think we have an opportunity here to recruit and be visible and encourage people to think about Manitoba because it's a great place to live and to work.
So obviously she's been championing this. Sounds like she thinks the grass for her at least is greener here.
Yeah, well, she repeated many times during the interview, "Il fait bon vivre ici," or "life is really good here." And so the quality of life was definitely something that came up frequently. But for her, the bilingual aspect is definitely something that is a strong factor in her staying here. So I asked her about the presence of French professionally, what it changed for her and personally as well.
I will say this to anybody who wants to hear it, but French is really present here in Manitoba, in Winnipeg, in many of the surrounding communities. And in my work, I work at an English hospital, but French is definitely present with many of my patients, some of the staff. I definitely appreciate, how important it is to be bilingual for some of the French Manitobans who feel more comfortable speaking in French, and actually a lot of immigrant patients. And you'll see them physically relax and be kind of, feel a little less stressed to be talking to a doctor if they can be heard and spoken to in French.
Thanks for adding to our series of conversations now about doctor recruitment outside the province, Catherine. Appreciate having you here.
My pleasure.
That is Radio-Canada reporter Catherine Moreau, live in Studio 15 with us in the show. Louis Riel was honored yesterday on the day of his death 140 years ago now. The Red River Métis leader was executed by hanging on November 16, 1885. Métis people, First Nations and Francophones were gathering at the gravesite over in St. Boniface at the cathedral to honor the late leader. Now, Manitoba Premier Wap Kinew was there. Also, Prime Minister Mark Carney was there. Manitoba Métis Federation says this is, as you've been hearing in the news, the first time a sitting Prime Minister has come to pay respects on the day of Louis Riel's death.
It is an honor for me to join, on behalf of the Government of Canada, to join you to commemorate Louis Riel, a foundational figure in the histories of Manitoba and of Canada. 140 years after his execution divided a young nation, Louis Riel's legacy helps to unite a maturing Canada. A Canada that is determined to reconcile with and learn from our history. Throughout his life, Louis Riel struggled for social justice. He fought to defend Métis rights and identity. Riel's title as the father of Manitoba alludes to much, much more than his negotiations for this province to join Confederation. It captures his relentless drive for the Métis to be full partners in Canada, and his guiding principles in establishing the province. While reconciliation is a process as yet unfinished, progress has been made, and the trajectory is encouraging. Partnership, open dialogue, building together are how we must move forward. It's how we can fulfill the vision of the man we're here today to commemorate, and it's how we will honor the legacy of Louis Riel. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
So very, very proud to be here with everybody today. And I am very, very proud as a Premier of Manitoba to welcome Prime Minister Mark Carney to this year's honoring of Louis Riel. And the reason why it's so significant to welcome a sitting Prime Minister is because in Riel's day, the Prime Minister of Canada was calling for Riel's execution. And here we are 7 generations later, the Prime Minister of Canada is here to pay respect and to honor Louis Riel. And that shows us that Riel's work is not done. His legacy is alive in our time. Riel's contributions are immense. Of course, he was an advocate for the Métis people, as well as First Nations rights, but he was an advocate for minority language rights. He was an advocate for human rights and the recognition of basic freedoms and liberties for all people who would live in this part of the world. And so to see that the project of reconciliation continues, but also the project of recognizing our rights and freedoms within Canada continues to evolve, it fills me with great, great pride. And so every year I think we take something different out of this honoring of the death of Louis Riel. And perhaps this year is a very special, auspicious occasion of reflecting on how his legacy continues to drive our country forward and continues to the advance of truth, liberty, and justice for all.
Manitoba Métis Federation President David Chartrand also spoke yesterday. He started by saying the Métis never give up.
I'll send a message to the Prime Minister. The Métis never give up. Never. No, through hell or high water, we never give up. Just like Riel, his message that he sent, that we believe on just and honorable ways of doing things together as one. Riel actually had a vision that in the future, the First Nations, for example, there's a bullet right in the Manitoba Act as he's putting forth his demands, is to negotiate the treaties with the Indians. The word Indians was used then. To negotiate treaties with the Indians. And Treaty 1 comes in 1871. Ours in the Manitoba Act comes in 1870, but it never fulfilled its obligation. But you just heard, Mr. Prime Minister, what it is that we face as a people, how discrimination still exists today and why. And now we need to all work together to defend ourselves. We have our country under threat right now. And I think, and I believe in this, everybody knows me, I've been around a hell of a long time. I truly believe that the good Lord gives us a reason for our purposes. Everybody's selected, and there's a purpose for each and every one of us. And I believe at this point in time, there is a purpose for you, Mark. You came in skilled negotiator, skilled banker, skilled to understand how the commodities of exchange happen in the world and how exchange of merchandise, money, and product can change a very entire country. We are under economic attack right now. And we cannot take this lightly. I guarantee you Riel would not take it lightly. He'd be standing up to defend, as we did till the Fenians when they were trying to come in and make this an American state at the time. The Fenians were trying to come. The Métis said, you cross that border, you're going to fight with us. And they backed away. And we sell the same thing to right now, not only John McDonnell, we say the same thing now to Trump. We're not for sale, man. You get the hell out of here and find your own places to buy in the United States, but you're not coming here. We'll stand up with you, we'll fight against you, and we'll do everything in our power to hold against you. So we need to make change economically. We need to look at the economy of our province as the responsibility Riel would have as a provincial government. Churchill needs to come. You know, people would say that it's not necessary because we have already ports. No. Sea to sea. Now there's another sea. We keep on mentioning sea to sea to sea. Let's not forget the third sea. Yeah, so let's make sure that as Manitobans, and the message we send to Trump on behalf of our great Premier, Louis Riel, that we set the stage now of investments may not look as a wise decision at this point in time, but I believe they're truly wise, Mr. Prime Minister. Your direction is going to change our trajectory where we're going. If we do not change, we got too complacent with the United States. 80% of our exchange in business is with our southern brother. And now the southern brother has told us, you're no longer my kin. And I'm going to take you on or take you over. So now we got to find a new place to do our business. And I think we're in the right direction. You've got the support of my government, I guarantee you 100%. So when you start looking at the future, Riel would be honored to know that his people are not talking just about our rights. We're not just talking about our struggles. We're talking about Manitoba, we're talking about Canada. That's the vision he would have. That's the vision he'd stand for. A proud Canada, a proud united Canada. One that you can give, if necessary, fight for in any capacity. And I do not promote picking up guns to fight. But the threat that's coming, they might be a third world war. They just might be. You know, and that's why I see the national defense you're going to be putting up by Churchill. I hope the hell it comes real. I hope it's not passed away because Russia is not that far away from us. And we need to understand and educate the young generation today that we're ready. Why am I talking about all this stuff this way? Not talking about Riel itself. Because that's what Riel would have been doing if he was standing here today. He would have been standing for United Canada. He would have been standing for what's good and what's just. And he would have damn well stood to make sure that Canada was protected against and with all costs necessary to defend the people of Manitoba and Canada. So Our leader, I must tell you, you make us proud. 140 years ago, they thought they'd silence you. In fact, your voice became stronger. I'll share this with you, Mr. Prime Minister. He said, one day this country will recognize me for the good I've done. That day is here by you coming here personally. So thank you very much.
Talking yesterday at the grave of Louis Riel, the Manitoba Métis Federation president. Let's return to our series on conflict in the workplace, stemming out of a report from Myers-Briggs in 2022, finding employees spend more than 4 hours a week dealing with conflict. Laura Cavanagh has insight into this, registered psychotherapist, but also Professor of Behavioural Sciences at Seneca Polytechnic. She specializes in workplace conflict, and I spoke with her last week.
Good morning, Marcy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So what is typically, do we understand what's typically at the root of disagreements with colleagues at work?
Yeah, that's a great question because, as you said, this is not an uncommon experience. In fact, 85% of people will experience conflict at some point with coworkers, and about 30% report frequent conflict. And I want to be clear that we're not talking about really egregious violations of workplace behavior. So we're not talking about harassment or abuses of power, but there's a book by psychologist Tessa West called Jerks at Work. And that's kind of what we're talking about today, just people who are hard to work with. And it's interesting because if you ask the person themselves, what is this conflict about? They will really point to personality issues with the coworker. But what the research shows is that what predicts workplace conflict, both task-related and interpersonal actually, is the level of workplace support. So when we're embroiled in it, we become very focused on the person. They do this and they don't do that, and I don't like that, or do whatever it is, about that person. Here's the reasons I can't get along with them. But that it's really predicted by whether the workplace can manage these issues effectively or not, which kind of makes sense if you think about it, because we're just people and people are flawed. And so if you can't I'll just keep hiring until I hire people with zero flaws, that's not going to happen. But effective workplaces support their employees in managing it.
So in an ineffective workplace, how much, I'll ask about managing it in a moment, but what is the environment like? Is it lack of communication? Are there hierarchical power structures set up? Or what are some of the things that contribute when it's not working?
All of the above. So it's we often think first of really unhealthy work environments, which is a very good example. So like you said, poor boundaries between manager and employees that can lead to favoritism, a culture of competition, misuse of authority. Those are all examples of a really unhealthy or hostile work environment. But it can also be the other thing that you said, which is really unclear expectations and a lack of clarity among the workplace culture. So poorly communicated expectations, blurred hierarchy where no one really knows who's in charge, people who have shared authority but differing goals, goals that are unclear or poorly defined, right? So a lot of it is miscommunication or a lack of clarity.
It's interesting because I was in a story meeting once with a colleague and we were debating a story. So we were talking about different aspects and we were getting into it over something. And they looked at me at one point and they said, "You realize the rest of the room thinks we're fighting." And both of us stopped because our style was, and each of us didn't feel that way. But we stopped because we looked around the room. So can you help us understand what we can do to diffuse an argument at work when it gets too hot, or else to be mindful of what our own, people think this is how I speak or how I engage, but it may not be helpful in a workplace.
Well, Mark, I'm actually really glad you shared that example because conflict at work is not necessarily a bad thing, right? In fact, if there's no conflict, it typically means that people are not invested in their workplace. So, we experience conflict when we're passionate about things, when we're invested, when we're interested, when we care. And there's a book by psychologist Bruce Tuckman that's now become a management classic where he talks about the stages of team development at work, which many people have heard of. So the stages are forming, storming, norming, performing. And you have to get through storming to really get through to performing. But Tuckman himself acknowledges that's a difficult stage And it requires good leadership because relationships can fracture.
Mhm.
But I also think it's really important to be able to kind of tolerate that kind of goal-directed conflict that you were just describing, right? So, relationships fracture when we start hurling insults at each other. When we both care about our job, that's how we get to be a high-performing team.
So, what is the role of the employer in these situations, especially if the team is storming, as you put it? I love that, by the way, that the phases.
Yeah. So, like I said at the beginning, this is really, the research is pretty unequivocal that this is the critical element, right? And there may be some amount of friction in all workplaces because, like, as I said, we're just people. But it's the manager's job and the organization's job as a whole to really create a culture where workplace conflict is resolvable. And what's interesting is we tend to think of these as personality traits, both when we're embroiled in it, but even just sort of from an intellectual perspective. But in fact, these are skills, and they can be taught. Now, 60% of people receive no conflict management training, including when they get promoted to being a people manager. So one of the most important parts of their job is conflict resolution in order to create these high-performing teams, but they don't get taught how to do it. And of when people do get that training, 95% report that it is very, very helpful. So I think if we think of these as skills that you can learn, then it becomes clear that the organization has a responsibility to invest in that teaching, right? And maybe you can't send all your employees, but at the very least, managers should be getting trained in this so that they can model it for their employees and facilitate periods of storming and conflict.
I'm so interested in leadership, so I just want to read a quote that was shared with me. This is, and I'm not going to be able to source the quote because it's sourced from an author from a workbook and was shared with me by a colleague. But I think it's a good thing to read to you in the context of what you've been saying. As a leader, it's not about being in charge; it's to take care of those in your charge.
That's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And it really, there's...
But how do you do it?
Again, unequivocal on that, right? Is that when people feel supported, they're happier, they feel better about the company, and the behavior that the employer is looking for, no turnover, lower rates of absenteeism, that also follows. So this is a real important investment. And I think, the goal should not be to avoid conflict entirely because, again, that shows a lack of sort of investment and interest in our own work, but to be able to resolve it. And they say, good bosses follow the 3 C's, which is coaching, counseling, and corrective action. Like, you have to teach people. These are skills to learn.
Thank you very much, Laura. Appreciate it always.
Thanks for having me, Marcy.
Laura Cavanagh, I spoke with her last week, registered psychotherapist, author, Professor of Behavioural Sciences at Seneca Polytechnic, and an expert on workplace conflict. Weighing in on our series, by the way. So if you want to weigh in, call us, 788-3205. How do you deal with workplace conflict? Are you a manager? How often do you deal with this? Also, call at noon. That's the noon call in between 12:30 and 1. And by the way, that quote from author Simon Sinek.